In 2006, according to Pew Research Centre, more than 74,000 people worked in newspaper journalism in the United States. By 2020, that number had plummeted to 30,000 people, and newspaper revenues dive-bombed from $60 billion annually, combined advertising and circulation, to less than $24 billion in 2020. What's also interesting is that the ratio of ad revenue and circulation revenue equalized. In other words, advertisers were bailing due to falling circulation numbers for every publication save the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The factors contributing to the shift in circulation and revenue may actually have had more to do with ecosystem shifts than to a lack of interest in journalism, especially good journalism. David Skok, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of The Logic, an online publication, says good journalism matters, and he points to The Logic's mission statement, that being, helping build the future of the innovation economy. Skok says, everything we do is underscored by our commitment to making Canada a better place to live and work, by sparking important conversations about what the country wants to be. At The Logic, we believe the best days of journalism are ahead of us, with readers at the core. I invited David Skok to join me for a conversation that matters about the state of journalism and why solid reporting continues to thrive and the important role it plays in helping you make informed decisions. David, welcome.
Give us a little.
It's my pleasure. Give our readers a little bit of an overview of what The Logic, how it unfolds in its ability to be able to deliver information on a consistent basis that gives them real insights.
Very early on, recognized that the key for The Logic was going to be giving our reporters the time and space, and hopefully down the road, the resources to do what they needed to do. And I cannot emphasize enough how rare that has been in journalism for the last 2 decades. There's been a constant, as you've outlined there, Stuart, tailspin of reductions in revenue. That reduction in revenue has cut newsrooms, and the tailspin continues. Our bet and our argument was, well, let's put the journalists first. Let's make the creatives who do this incredible work the center of what we do and build a business around them. And so really what we have done is we give our reporters the time and space to do their work. They all do original reporting. The average publication will probably have each reporter do 3 to 5 stories a week. We have our reporters do 1 story every 2 weeks. And then, not just that, once the reporters have filed their stories, it goes through 3 to 5 different editing, through 3 to 5 different editing back and forth. So there's a constant collaboration there with editors, fact checkers, copy editors, to make sure that what we're putting out is worth your time. And that's really the core bet or premise from a quality perspective in why The Logic exists. There's editorial reasons why it exists as well, and I'm sure we get into it, but that was really the core. Let's finally have a place where reporters can do the work that they really are meant to do.
So there's 2 components in that. One is the depth and breadth of information that you're able to pull into a story when you're given that time. But then there's also the quality of the writing. In what I've read, the writing, I have to praise, is clean, to the point. It's not filled with hyperbole. And I get the sense in reading this that I'm getting solid information. And this is something that I feel is lacking in so many publications that are driven towards, let me just get clicks. That doesn't seem to be your motivation.
It isn't. We are not motivated at all by page views. Sure, as a subscription-driven business, we want more readers to read us, because ultimately then more people will pay for the journalism that they're reading. But ultimately, it's been important to us to start organically from let's surprise and delight 100 people first, and then build out from there and up. And that really has been at our core what we do. And in terms of the quality, you had a guest on last year. I was watching with Jazz Johal, a former colleague of mine, who talked about that middle, the mushy middle getting eroded in newsrooms, meaning the mentors, the editors. Sure, they used to have fedora hats and be smoking, and there were a lot of things to not like about that period. But what you had were editors or mid-managers who were able to teach new journalists how to do the profession the right way. And so we've also really tried to recruit and hire great editors who help these reporters in that back and forth, as opposed to what you may read elsewhere, which is the quick hot take or perspective in the process. The other thing I would add, and not to go on too much, is we don't have opinion at all, other than I write a column every few weeks. But other than that, there is no editorializing of our work, because we decided early on we didn't want to muddy the waters or have people guessing about whether we're left-leaning or right-leaning or political motivations. We don't have that. Our motivation is journalism, and so it's important that we stick to reporting.
So I look at your model, and to me it looks like you are deriving your revenue through a subscription base. And as you say, your objective is on the readers. It seems counterintuitive in these days, but why is it important that you do that? And coupled with that question is, how's it going from a financial perspective? Because you need those finances to be able to then put the resources that your journalists need out there for them to be able to do their best quality reporting.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned off the top, advertising revenue has completely eroded, and that's where you see a lot of our competitors, clamoring for big tech, Google, Facebook, and others to subsidize that delta of revenues that they've lost. Only 7% of our revenue comes from advertising. So for us, it's actually a growth area opportunity. And the irony being that the more subscribers we get, the more advertiser interest there is in wanting to align themselves with our work, because we come with a readership that is highly engaged, has a clearly shows that they have the willingness to spend on quality, which most brands want alignment with. So we're actually finding that the building a base of the journalism publication off of the reader is helping to drive other revenue streams as well. The other thing about the subscription business that's really unique in journalism, but very common in other industries, is compound revenue growth. So if you were to subscribe in our first year when we launched in 2018, and then you renewed in 2019 and renewed again in 2020, that's additional revenue that we're getting at very little marginal cost to our business. So the compound revenue growth continues. So in fact, in an odd way, the longer we exist, the healthier our business will be, because the more compound revenue we're able to attract. So it's, in fact, as somebody told me very early on, subscription businesses are really, really hard to build, because it's not easy to build the trust to have somebody say, I'm willing to part with my dollars for your product. But once you've built it, it's actually incredibly difficult to tear down, because the foundation is so strong.
It's a bit gutsy too, because I know when I went onto your website the first time, you basically say, subscribe to read. You want access to what we're doing? You're paying for it. Why is it important that we do that? And what does that then say about the value of the material that you are producing for readers?
The Reuters Institute at Oxford University does a report every year where country by country they break down the willingness of readers to pay for journalism in each country. Very early on, when we looked at it, Canada had a willingness to pay of 6 or 7%, whereas the United States had a willingness to pay of 13 or 14%, and the Nordic countries were well off the charts at 20% or 21%. And we felt that there was a delta there that we could train readers essentially to say, no, if you want great journalism, you have to pay for it. And so bring it in closer in line with the US. So if it was at 6 or 7%, by being adamant about not being able to pay for it, about not being able to read it unless you paid for it, we were training our readers, and ultimately, hopefully more Canadians, that if they want great journalism, it's not free. That journalists need to feed themselves and live an honest wage, and in order to do that, they need to be paid for that work. It also, though, puts a real impetus on us to make sure that every story we produce is worth paying for. And of course, there are days when we don't get there, but every reporter, every editor on our team knows that our number one job is not just to be as good as publications that have been around for 120, 130 years, but to be better, 10 times better. Otherwise, why are you paying for us? And I think that's made our journalism better, and in turn, hopefully, made others better in the process.
So that comes down to, what is your editorial mission? You talk about focusing in on Canada's innovation advantage, and I hope that you're right, because as we're seeing the shift away from such a heavy reliance on the resource sector, we need to fully embrace innovation. And I think that we have that ability here, but do we have the weight of the masses saying, let's really drive forward with that? And so what is your editorial mission in helping us get to that place that I think is very important for us in the future?
Well, you touched on it. Our job is to facilitate those hard conversations. If you look at the Canadian economy, it is heavily dependent on resource extraction and on real estate. You take those two things away, and our GDP growth has been negligible over the last 2 decades and continues to fall behind competing other global players. And so the logic coverage area is essentially like, we'll take away resource extraction, take away real estate. How are we doing in these other areas, and what is happening in these other areas? So whether it's the digital transformation of our currencies, our banks, so fintechs and digital currency, or mineral supply chains and electric vehicle transformations. So we cover EVs and mineral supply chain, or whether it's digital taxation policies and government policies around innovation, science, and economic development, or even innovation in the energy sector itself. We have 6 bureaus across the country. We have a team of 15 reporters now in 6 bureaus across the country, and all of them are focused on those coverage areas. So we say, if you want to know what happened in Canada 5 years ago, maybe read others. If you want to know what's going to happen in Canada 5 years from now, read the logic. And I think we've stayed true to that, in that oftentimes the things we're reporting on are things that tend to become mainstream a few months or years later. I think most recently of the Prime Minister and the trade talks with NAFTA and Biden around EVs and some of those policies. We had been covering with a full-time reporter on that for about a year.
So does Canada have an advantage? And I know that you just talked about EVs, but I want to sort of shift your mind a little bit to biomedical engineering and life sciences, because I feel that we've got an emerging center of creative, innovative advances happening here in British Columbia. But do we have the wherewithal as a country to lift ourselves beyond being, well, we're a nice incubator state? Can we actually turn these into powerful organizations that will help to drive the economy?
Yeah, and certainly, we've reported on Abcelera in BC and some of the challenges that they have been quite outspoken about in terms of not being able to get the product to market in Canada. Do we have the ability? Absolutely. This country is able to attract talent. We've reported a lot on our immigration system and the opportunities that's allowed us to bring great people into the country. Where we fall short, or would seem to fall short based on what we report, is in the intellectual property, maintaining the licensing rights of whatever it is that we do. And then secondarily, and talked about less, and I think the pandemic has shown that the weakness here is in the manufacturing capacity. It's been really challenging, even on the vaccine front, as we've seen, to develop the manufacturing needed to build these things to market. We've tended to offshore a lot of that stuff. So these are some of the core things that we need to reconcile coming out of the pandemic. Are what is our manufacturing capacity? What is our ability to protect and license our own intellectual property? You're seeing more of that happen. There's definitely more capital flowing in Canada than there was, and that's to a great credit of policymakers who have really enriched that space through things like BDC, EDC, and others. So capital isn't the issue anymore. It's the ability to execute on that and distribute it. And as well, I would say procurement, as I touched on with Accelera. Um, do we are not a country that has scale. You hear that. I'm sure a lot of your guests say that. It's really challenging in Canada to hit scale. Well, one of the ways around that is government procurement, and we are still, particularly in the life sciences space, um, very slow to adopt Canadian, made in Canada solutions to things before looking outside to large foreign players.
My concern, and I'm hoping that through the logic you can help, drive us beyond our own. I don't know if it's a fear or insecurity or whatever, but a couple of years ago I was trying to get the then Minister of Innovation here in British Columbia to come on my show, and to quote Jim Collins, ask him what his great big hairy audacious idea was for the innovative and tech sectors in British Columbia. Didn't come on the show. Didn't have a great big hairy audacious idea. And I worry, do we feel that that is beyond our reach? And what role can you play in saying, no, we can do this, we can achieve this?
One of the things that we lost without having media as a gatekeeper anymore is the ability to hold politicians to account in the same way. Politicians can say they can easily ignore the logic or ignore you and go about their business and reflect the polls as opposed to what the right thing to do is to hope to be held accountable. I think, and obviously I'm biased here, I think the best way to change that is by supporting great journalism and great journalists and allowing them to be your advocate in those rooms and getting in there and asking those questions. And if not actually talking to them, certainly doing the investigative reporting or the in-depth reporting that holds them to account. So, where our Ottawa team, we have a bureau in Ottawa, and they do a lot of work looking at the funding that's been allocated, whether it's through the Strategic Innovation Fund, through BDC. Now there's things like, a CARPA, DARPA equivalent in Canada that's being talked about, and saying, okay, well, where's that money going? And is it being spent wisely? And what kind of returns are you getting on that? And is that any better or worse than the private sector? So why are you doing it in the first place? I think more of that, more reporting that has accountability will get politicians and the public more aware of what's there. Personally, do I believe that Canada has the potential? Absolutely. I wouldn't be in this country if I didn't believe that. This country's given me every opportunity known to man, and we have the education system, we have the intelligence, we have the capital, and there's no reason why we can't. But I do think that we need to hold our elected officials and our private corporations to a higher standard.
So, David, I can't help but also think that when you're doing that good quality reporting and you are holding politicians to account, you put it out there, there are other journalists who will be reading your material, and that can motivate them to also cover those stories.
We're very competitive beings in journalism, and I actually think that's a feature, not a bug, in that you're right. If we're doing our job, we're making others better as well. And if they're doing their job, they'll make us better as well. This gets at something you didn't ask, but I'll answer it. The natural thing that people think when they hear about the logic or about paywall journalism more broadly is, well, that's great. It serves a very elite audience at the top of the income bracket, and your work isn't accessible to everybody, so it's undemocratic. And my argument on that is, well, we're in a moment in time. So let's just accept that, at this particular moment, we have not yet consolidated the journalism space. So there's a lot of players all over the place, and eventually, in pursuit of profits or power, that will all consolidate again, like it did in the 1930s, 1940s. So that's one. But two, even if our journalism isn't accessible to you, it's accessible to the CBC, it's accessible to the Globe and Mail, and the Financial Post, and they're reading us and then hopefully using our stories to think about new ideas. And the other thing is, just writing quite frankly, matching our stories is another thing that we do in journalism, which is, they go and they chase the same story sources that we spoke to. I'm okay with that. I think that helps make the ecosystem better, which is one of the goals of the logic, was to reframe the narrative around the state of journalism in this country and what's possible. And 3.5 years in, I hope that we've succeeded in being the tip of that spear and driving that momentum forward.
As you could tell from my intro and our before recording comments, you went, oh, an optimistic story about journalism. And I remain optimistic. I think there are extraordinary organizations and people like yourself and those who are working with you who are producing work that really matter and give people the kind of information that allow them to make an informed choice, not a directed choice. And this is what I think is the real role of journalism in society as a whole, and particularly in a democratic society.
Agreed. So when we launched the Logic, I had three goals. One was to make Canadian journalism better, to make Canada a better place to live and work. And 3 was to show that reporting and editors and journalists more broadly, who have constantly been battered for the last 2 decades, need to be the center of any media venture, because they're what makes this all work. I grew up in South Africa. I was born in South Africa, immigrated to Canada when I was 9.5. Even at that young age, I know and lived through an apartheid state that did not have a free press. And the role of media is way more than just building a business. It's building democracy and holding a very fragile part of this democracy together. So it's vital we get it right.
As you're saying that, I remember the reporting from Peter Kent when he was in South Africa for CBC, and that would have had a tremendous influence on the Mulroney government, and Canadians played an important role in transition in South Africa. This is where journalism matters.
The CBC was instrumental in the rewriting of the Constitution. After that was rewritten in South Africa, the CBC was instrumental in training a whole generation of journalists at the South African Broadcasting Corporation as well.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the work that you're doing. Of course, I'm a supporter of what you're doing because I really do believe that good journalism matters and that people are hungry for it. So I wish you great success. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Delighted. Thank you so much for your interest.